The dust from the road clung to Penelope Reynolds' skirts as she approached the weathered sign that read Montezuma, Colorado population 213. Her journey from Boston had taken nearly a week, each passing mile amplifying both her doubts and determination. The position of schoolteacher in this remote mining town offered her something she desperately needed: a fresh start, far from the whispers and pitying glances that had followed her since Thomas's betrayal. The year was 1878, and the West was still wild enough to make a woman traveling alone an oddity. Penelope clutched her carpetbag tighter as she made her way down the town's main street. Montezuma had sprung up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains, and it showed in the hasty construction. Buildings leaned at precarious angles, their wooden facades already weathered despite their relative youth. Miss Reynolds. A portly man with a magnificent mustache hurried toward her. "I'm Mayor Holbrook. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow's stage," Penelope offered a practiced smile. "I managed to secure passage on a freight wagon. The driver was kind enough to bring me directly into town." Enterprising. "That's the spirit we need." The mayor beamed, taking her bag. "The schoolhouse isn't quite ready. Carpenter's finishing the last of the desks, but we've arranged lodging for you at Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house in the meantime." As they walked, Penelope noted the curious stares from townspeople. Montezuma had few women, even fewer who wore the fine clothes of an Easterner. Her navy traveling suit, though dusty from the journey, marked her immediately as an outsider. "Town's growing fast," Mayor Holbrook continued proudly. "Nearly 30 children of school age now. Parents are mighty pleased to have a proper teacher at last." "I look forward to meeting them all," Penelope replied, though her stomach fluttered with nervousness. Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house was one of the few structures that appeared built to last. The two-story white clapboard building boasted actual glass windows and a neat picket fence. The proprietress, a stern-looking widow with steel-gray hair, welcomed Penelope with brisk efficiency. "Room at the top of the stairs," she instructed. "Meals at 7 noon and 6 sharp. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, no liquor on the premises." "Yes, madam," Penelope nodded, grateful for the clear rules. After the chaos of her last months in Boston, order was comforting. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a small window overlooking the dusty street below. Penelope unpacked her meager belongings, arranging her books on the lone shelf. The titles reflected her passion: collections of children's stories, primers, mathematics texts, and several volumes of poetry. Teaching had always been her calling, even when her parents had hoped for a more advantageous marriage. That evening, Penelope met her fellow boarders, 2 older spinster sisters who worked in the town's only dress shop, and a young clerk from the assayer's office. Conversation over Mrs. Whittaker's roast beef and potatoes was polite but reserved, everyone sizing up the newcomer carefully. "The children here are a bit." Mrs. Whittaker paused delicately, untamed. "No teacher has stayed longer than 3 months. "I'm not easily discouraged," Penelope replied, her chin lifting slightly. "You haven't met the Tucker twins yet," the younger spinster sister murmured, exchanging a knowing look with her sister. "The Tucker boys, what should I know about them?" Penelope asked. "Just that their father, Luke Tucker, owns the largest ranch in the county. Man lost his wife 2 years back, childbirth fever. Those boys run wild as jackrabbits now." The older sister shook her head. "Their father's too busy with the ranch to manage them properly. Mr. Tucker rarely comes to town except for supplies or business with the bank," Mrs. Whittaker added. "Keeps to himself, but his cattle operation helps keep this town alive. The twins need a firm hand, but they're not bad boys, just spirited." Penelope absorbed this information, mentally adding the Tucker twins to her growing list of challenges. "I believe all children respond to structure and kindness in equal measure." The others exchanged skeptical glances, but said nothing more. The following day, Penelope visited the schoolhouse, a single-room building at the edge of town. The carpenter, a lanky man named Peterson, was just finishing the last of the student desks. 28 pupils you'll have, miss," he told her as he planed the edge of a desktop smooth. "Ages 6 to 15, all learning together." "I've taught combined classes before," Penelope assured him, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the teacher's desk. In Boston, I had 30 students ranging from first readers to advanced mathematics. Boston, eh? Peterson whistled. Long way from home. Yes, Penelope said simply. Not elaborating on why she traveled so far over the next 3 days, Penelope prepared the schoolhouse, arranging books, writing materials, and creating a schedule that would accommodate the varying ages and abilities of her students. She posted notices about the school's opening day, scheduled for the following Monday. By Sunday evening, she felt as ready as she could be. Monday morning dawned clear and crisp, typical for early September in the Colorado mountains. Penelope arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, her heart pounding with anticipation. She smoothed her dark blue skirt, adjusted the high collar of her white shirtwaist, and took a deep breath. The children began arriving in small groups. Some came with parents, others wandered in alone. Most regarded their new teacher with wary curiosity. By 8 o'clock, 26 students had filled the desks, ranging from tiny, wide-eyed 6-year-olds to gangly teenagers trying to appear disinterested. 2 desks remained conspicuously empty. Where are the Tucker twins? Penelope asked, consulting her student roster. A freckle-faced boy in the back row snickered. Probably off causing trouble somewhere, miss. Joshua Miller, mind your tongue, scolded a girl who could only be his older sister. Penelope smiled politely. Thank you, but I prefer to form my own opinions of my students. Now, shall we begin with introductions? She had just finished recording all the names when the schoolhouse door banged open. 2 identical boys of about 8 stood in the doorway, identical grins on their dirt-smudged faces. Their clothes were of good quality but rumpled, as if they'd slept in them. You must be the Tucker twins, Penelope said, keeping her voice even. I'm Miss Reynolds, your teacher. Please take your seats. The boys exchanged a look that clearly communicated mischievous intent before shuffling to the empty desks. Penelope noticed several students shifting nervously, as if anticipating disruption. I'm Matthew Tucker, miss, said one. And I'm Mark Tucker, said the other. How do you tell him apart, Miss Reynolds? Called out a small voice from the front row. Penelope studied the twins. Though identical at first glance, she noted subtle differences. Matthew's cowlick stood slightly higher. Mark's freckles clustered more densely across his nose. I believe I'll manage, she said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. Now, before we begin our lessons, I'd like to establish some rules for our classroom. The morning progressed better than Penelope had dared hope. Despite a few restless moments and one spitball incident quickly traced to Joshua Miller, the children were generally attentive. Even the Tucker twins, though clearly bursting with energy, confined their disruptions to whispered conversations and the occasional snicker. After dismissing the students for lunch, Penelope sank into her chair, allowing herself a moment of relief. The afternoon session would focus on reading and storytelling, her favorite subjects to teach. When the children returned, she divided them into groups based on reading ability. While the older students worked on comprehension exercises, she gathered the youngest around her for a reading circle. Today, I'd like to read you a story about a brave knight, she began, opening one of her cherished storybooks. Knights ain't real, Mark Tucker interjected. Knights aren't real, Penelope corrected gently. But stories help us imagine different places and times. Sometimes they teach us important lessons, too. Our pa says stories are just fancy lies, Matthew added, though his eyes betrayed interest despite his words. Well, Penelope said thoughtfully, I believe stories are more like windows. They let us see things we might not otherwise experience. Would you give this one a chance? The twins exchanged another look, then shrugged in unison. Penelope began reading, her voice rising and falling dramatically as the tale unfolded. Soon, all the children were captivated, even the Tucker twins, who had edged closer without seeming to realize it. When school ended that afternoon, Penelope felt cautiously optimistic. As the children filed out, Matthew Tucker lingered at her desk. Miss Reynolds, does that book have more stories in it? Many more, she smiled. Could you read another one tomorrow? His voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid his brother might overhear this show of enthusiasm. Of course, Matthew, that's what books are for. He nodded and dashed out to join his twin, who waited impatiently by the door. Penelope watched them race down the dusty road, wondering about the ranch and the father who was raising these boys alone. The first week passed in a blur of lessons, minor disciplinary issues, and getting to know her students. The Tucker twins continued to arrive late each morning, always slightly disheveled but increasingly engaged in the lessons, particularly story time. Penelope couldn't help wondering about their home situation. Did they ride to town alone each day? Who prepared their meals? The questions nagged at her. On Friday afternoon, as she was locking up the schoolhouse, a magnificent black stallion thundered down the road, pulling up sharply before the building. The rider, a tall man with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind, dismounted with fluid grace. Miss Reynolds. His voice was deep, with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. "Yes," she replied, suddenly conscious of her wind-blown hair and ink-stained fingers. "Luke Tucker," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his Stetson. "I understand my boys have been attending your school this week." Up close, Luke Tucker was even more imposing. His eyes, the same deep blue as his son's, assessed her carefully. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the short beard that covered his chin. Despite the hardness in his expression, there was something compelling about him, a contained energy that reminded Penelope of a coiled spring. "Yes, Matthew and Mark have been attending," she confirmed. "They're bright boys, though they do have a tendency to arrive late." A frown creased his brow. "Late? They leave the ranch by 7 each morning." "They don't arrive until after 8, Mr. Tucker. School begins at 8 o'clock sharp." He muttered something under his breath that Penelope suspected wasn't suitable for polite company. "I'll have a word with them." "Are they causing other problems?" Penelope considered her words carefully. "They're adjusting. I believe they'll do well with consistent guidance." "Their mother would have." He began, then stopped abruptly. "Well, she's not here. I do what I can." The raw pain in those few words touched Penelope unexpectedly. "Mr. Tucker, I didn't mean to imply, no offense taken, Miss Reynolds. I know raising boys requires a woman's touch, something my ranch is sorely lacking." He cleared his throat. "I came to invite you to Sunday dinner. The boys seem taken with your stories, thought you might like to see where they live." The invitation surprised her. "That's very kind, but Mrs. Whittaker can vouch for my character," he interrupted, misreading her hesitation. "This isn't some improper suggestion. The housekeeper will be present, and the boys, of course." Penelope felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise, Mr. Tucker. I'm simply surprised by the invitation." "The boys asked," he admitted, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Said you had books they wanted to see." "First time they've shown interest in anything related to schooling. In that case, I'd be delighted to accept. I'll send the wagon for you after church, around 1 o'clock. With a nod and another touch of his hat brim, Luke Tucker remounted his stallion and rode away, leaving Penelope staring after him with mixed emotions. Sunday morning found Penelope sitting in Montezuma's small church, acutely aware of the whispers around her. Word of her invitation to the Tucker Ranch had spread quickly, thanks to Mrs. Whittaker's loose tongue. First woman to set foot on that property since Agnes died, the boarding house owner had told anyone who would listen. The schoolteacher must have made quite an impression. Penelope tried to focus on Reverend Miller's sermon, but her thoughts kept drifting to the upcoming visit. She had carefully selected several books she thought the twins might enjoy and wore her second-best dress, a forest green poplin with subtle white piping. Not too formal, but nicer than her everyday teaching clothes. After the service, as promised, a wagon appeared outside the boarding house. To her surprise, Luke Tucker himself sat in the driver's seat, the twins perched beside him. "Miss Reynolds." The boys called in unison as she approached, their faces scrubbed clean and hair slicked down with water in a failed attempt at neatness. "Good afternoon, boys. Mr. Tucker." She accepted his hand to climb into the wagon, settling on the bench seat beside him while the twins moved to the back. "Hope you don't mind the open wagon," Luke said as he flicked the reins. "The good carriage hasn't been used since," he stopped himself. "For some time, this is perfectly fine," Penelope assured him. "I enjoy the fresh air." The Tucker Ranch lay 5 miles outside Montezuma, in a picturesque valley sheltered by towering pines. As they approached, Penelope couldn't help but be impressed. The main house was substantial, a two-story structure of hewn logs with a wide porch and glass windows. Several outbuildings dotted the property and a large barn stood nearby. Everything was well maintained, if somewhat austere. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Agnes had plans to plant flower gardens," Luke replied, his voice tight. "Never got around to it." The boys scrambled down as soon as the wagon stopped, racing toward the house. Luke helped Penelope down, his hand strong and calloused against hers. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her arm. "Mrs. Finnegan's prepared a proper dinner," he said, leading her toward the house. "She comes in 3 days a week to cook and clean. Rest of the time we manage." "You and the boys alone?" Penelope asked. "And Hank, my foreman. Few ranch hands have bunks in the bunkhouse, but they take meals separately." The interior of the house was spacious but sparsely furnished. The front parlor contained a sofa, 2 chairs, and a small table, all good quality but showing signs of masculine neglect. No feminine touches softened the room, no cushions, curtains, or decorative items beyond a single landscape painting over the fireplace. The dining room revealed a large oak table set for 4 with surprisingly fine china and silver. Luke noticed her admiring the settings. "Agnes insisted on bringing her mother's dishes west," he explained. "Said just because we lived in the wilderness didn't mean we had to eat like savages. Mrs. Finnegan brings them out for special occasions." "And my visit is a special occasion?" Penelope asked, unable to keep a hint of teasing from her voice. The corner of Luke's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "First guest in 2 years. I'd say that qualifies, Mrs. Finnegan," a plump, red-faced woman in her 50s, served an impressive Sunday dinner: roast beef, potatoes, fresh baked bread, and stewed apples for dessert. Throughout the meal, the twins peppered Penelope with questions about Boston, her journey west, and most persistently about the books she had brought. "Can we see them now?" Mark asked the moment his plate was empty. "Mind your manners," Luke admonished. "Miss Reynolds hasn't finished her meal." "It's quite all right," Penelope assured him, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. "I've finished, and I'm eager to show the books as well." They retired to the parlor, where Penelope opened her satchel and produced 4 volumes of children's stories, adventures, folk tales, and legends carefully selected to appeal to active boys. "Could you read one now?" Matthew asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. "If your father doesn't object," Penelope replied, glancing at Luke, "by all means." He settled into one of the chairs, stretching his long legs before him. "I haven't heard a good story in some time." The boys sat cross-legged on the floor at Penelope's feet as she opened the first book. She chose a tale about a clever fox who outwitted a wolf, simple enough for young listeners, but with enough humor to entertain adults as well. As she read, she gave each character a different voice, acting out parts with gestures and facial expressions as she had done in her Boston classroom. The twins were enthralled, laughing at the funny parts and gasping at moments of tension. But it was Luke's reaction that caught her attention from the corner of her eye. The hard lines of his face had softened, and he watched her with undisguised appreciation. When their eyes met briefly over the top of the book, something passed between them, a moment of connection that left Penelope momentarily breathless. She finished the story and closed the book, suddenly aware of the silence in the room. "Another one," Mark pleaded. "Please, Miss Reynolds." Matthew added. Luke cleared his throat. "Boys, Miss Reynolds has been generous with her time already. We shouldn't impose further." "Actually, I'd be happy to read one more," Penelope said, "if you're sure you don't mind." "I find I'm enjoying the stories as much as the boys," Luke admitted, his voice low enough that only she could hear. The second story was longer, a legend about a brave young boy who saved his village from disaster. As Penelope read, she noticed the twins inching closer until they were leaning against her skirts, completely absorbed in the tale. Luke remained in his chair, but his posture had relaxed, the perpetual tension in his shoulders easing as he listened. When she finished, the parlor clock chimed 5 times. "I should be returning to town," Penelope said reluctantly. "School tomorrow." "Can't you stay for supper too?" Matthew asked. "Another time, perhaps," she replied, touched by the invitation. "But I've promised to review some papers this evening." "May we borrow the books?" Mark asked hopefully. Penelope hesitated. The books were among her most treasured possessions, carried carefully across the country. "The boys will treat them with respect," Luke assured her, reading her concern. "Won't you, boys?" "Yes, sir," they chorused. "Very well," Penelope agreed, "but you must bring them back to school when you've finished reading them." "We will." The twins clutched the books as if they were made of gold. Luke drove Penelope back to town himself, leaving the twins in Mrs. Finnegan's care. The evening air had grown cooler, and he insisted she use the blanket kept under the seat. "Thank you for coming today," he said as the wagon rumbled along the dusty road. "It's been pleasant having company." "I enjoyed myself very much," Penelope replied honestly. "You have a lovely home and wonderful boys." "They're good boys at heart," he agreed. "Just wild as mustangs since their mother passed. I've done my best," but he broke off, hands tightening on the reins. "It can't be easy raising them alone while managing a ranch, the ranch I can handle. It's knowing what they need beyond food and shelter that troubles me." Luke kept his eyes fixed on the road. Agnes was the gentle one. She knew about books and manners and all those things that make a person civilized. "And you provide security, strength, and a model of hard work," Penelope pointed out. "Those are equally important." Luke glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Most women I've met think I'm doing everything wrong." "I'm not most women, Mr. Tucker." "No," he agreed softly. "You certainly are not." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, Luke helped Penelope down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Perhaps," he said hesitantly, "you might consider another visit. The boys would be delighted," and he cleared his throat. "So would I." Penelope felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I would like that very much." "Next Sunday, then." "Next Sunday," she confirmed. As she watched him drive away, Penelope acknowledged the warmth spreading through her. Luke Tucker was nothing like the sophisticated men she had known in Boston. He was rough-edged, plain-spoken, and carried his grief like a physical weight. Yet there was something compelling about him, a fundamental decency and strength, that she found increasingly attractive. That night, as she prepared for bed, Penelope allowed herself to imagine, just briefly, what it might be like to belong in a home like the Tucker Ranch, to be part of a family again after so long alone. The thought both frightened and exhilarated her. The following week, Penelope noticed subtle changes in the Tucker twins. They arrived on time each morning, their clothing neater, their assignments completed with greater care. During reading sessions, they sat attentively, occasionally referencing stories from the books they had borrowed. On Wednesday, Matthew approached her desk during the lunch recess. "Miss Reynolds, Pa wants to know if you like chicken or beef better." Penelope blinked in surprise. "For Sunday dinner, you mean? Either is fine, truly." Pa said to ask specific, Matthew insisted. "So Mrs. Finnegan knows what to cook." "Chicken, then," Penelope replied, touched by Luke's thoughtfulness. Matthew nodded seriously. "I'll tell him. Oh, and Miss Reynolds, Pa's been reading your books to us at bedtime. He does the voices different than you, but it's still good." The image of Luke Tucker, hardened rancher, reading children's stories and attempting different voices for the characters made Penelope smile all afternoon. By Friday, word had spread throughout Montezuma that the new schoolteacher had been invited to the Tucker Ranch not once but twice. Mrs. Whittaker was beside herself with the gossip value of having Penelope under her roof. 2 invitations in as many weeks, and him not socializing since poor Agnes passed. Why, if that isn't significant, I don't know what is. "It's merely friendship, Mrs. Whittaker," Penelope demurred. "Mr. Tucker appreciates having someone encourage the boys' education." HMPH. "A man like Luke Tucker doesn't need friendship from a pretty young woman. Mark my words, he's looking for a mother for those boys." The thought left Penelope unsettled. Was that all Luke saw in her, a potential mother for his children? The possibility stung more than it should have after such brief acquaintance. Sunday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp, clear, and golden with falling leaves. Penelope wore her best dress to church, a deep burgundy wool that complemented her chestnut hair and hazel eyes. She had twisted her hair into an elegant chignon with a few soft curls framing her face. Luke and the twins sat 3 rows ahead in church, the boys unusually subdued in pressed shirts and carefully combed hair. Reverend Miller's sermon touched on the importance of community and supporting one another through hardship, words that resonated with Penelope, who had fled her own community when faced with difficulty. After the service, Luke approached her, hat in hand. The boys darted ahead to the wagon, eager to return home. "You look lovely today, Miss Reynolds," Luke said, his voice low and sincere. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Luke," he corrected. "If we're to be friends, I think first names would be appropriate. When we're not in front of the students, that is." "Penelope, then," she replied, liking the way his name felt on her lips. The drive to the ranch seemed shorter this time, filled with comfortable conversation about the town, the school, and the approaching winter. The twins chattered from the back of the wagon, telling Penelope about a fox they had spotted near the creek and the new foal born in the stable. At the ranch, Penelope noticed small changes since her last visit. Curtains now hung in the parlor windows, simple muslin, but freshly laundered and pressed. A vase of late wildflowers stood on the dining table, and the furniture gleamed with polish. "The place looks different," she observed. Luke looked almost embarrassed. "Mrs. Finnegan suggested a few improvements might be in order, for company's sake." The meal was delicious roast chicken with all the trimmings, followed by apple pie still warm from the oven. Throughout dinner, Penelope found herself increasingly aware of Luke, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the rare but transformative smile that occasionally brightened his features, the thoughtful attention he paid to her opinions. After the meal, the twins begged for more stories. "Miss Reynolds brought her book of poetry this time," Luke told them. "Said you're old enough to appreciate some finer literature." "What's poetry?" Mark asked, stumbling over the word. "It's like stories, but written in a special way," Penelope explained, "with rhythm and sometimes rhymes." "Like songs?" Matthew asked. "Very much like songs without music," Penelope agreed. "Shall we try some and see if you like it?" They settled in the parlor as before, but this time Luke sat closer, in a chair pulled near to where Penelope perched on the sofa with a twin on either side. She opened her volume of Longfellow, selecting The Village Blacksmith as appropriately adventurous for young boys. As she read, Penelope infused the words with drama and feeling. The boys listened intently, occasionally asking questions about unfamiliar words. Luke watched her with undisguised admiration, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished the poem, Mark scrunched his nose. "It's nice, but I like the fox story better." "Poetry takes some getting used to," Penelope acknowledged. "Let me try one more, something with more action." She turned to Paul Revere's Ride, knowing its galloping rhythm and revolutionary theme might appeal more to the boys. From the first lines, they were captivated, leaning forward as Penelope's voice rose and fell with the poem's urgency. "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." By the time she reached the dramatic conclusion, even Luke was on the edge of his seat. When she closed the book, there was a moment of appreciative silence. "That was like a real adventure," Matthew exclaimed. "Was Paul Revere a real person?" Mark asked eagerly. "Yes, he was," Penelope confirmed. "That poem tells a true story from the Revolutionary War." "See, boys," Luke said, "history isn't just dates and facts, it's full of brave men and exciting events." "Could you teach us more about the Revolution, Miss Reynolds?" Matthew asked. "That's an excellent idea," she replied. "Perhaps we could devote some time to historical stories in class." The afternoon passed pleasantly, with more poetry, discussions about history, and eventually, a tour of the ranch. Luke showed Penelope the stables, introducing her to his prized horses, while the twins ran ahead to the chicken coop to collect eggs for Mrs. Finnegan. "You've built something remarkable here," Penelope commented as they walked. "How long have you had the ranch?" 7 years, Luke replied. "Came west after the war with nothing but determination and the skills I'd learned on my father's farm in Tennessee. Started with 20 acres and 6 cows. Now it's 600 acres and over 200 head of cattle." "That's impressive," Luke shrugged. "Hard work mostly and luck. Met Agnes my second year here. She was the daughter of a merchant in Denver. Came out to visit her uncle for the summer and decided she preferred the mountains to the city." His voice softened. "She was the brave one choosing this life. She must have been remarkable," she was. Luke looked toward the distant mountains. strong enough to follow me into this wilderness, gentle enough to make it a home. The boys were just turning 6 when the fever took her. I'm so sorry, Penelope said softly, resisting the urge to touch his arm in comfort. What about you? Luke asked, visibly making an effort to change the subject. What brought you all the way from Boston to our little corner of Colorado? Penelope hesitated. I needed a change, a fresh start. Running from something? His perception startled her. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who recognizes the look. Luke's gaze held hers. We all have things we'd rather leave behind. I was engaged, Penelope admitted, the words coming more easily than expected, to a man I'd known since childhood. Thomas was charming, educated, from a good family. Everything seemed perfect until she took a deep breath. Until I discovered he'd been unfaithful with my closest friend. I'm sorry, Luke said simply. The betrayal was painful enough, but the gossip, the pitying looks, the whispers that somehow it was my fault for not keeping his interest. Penelope shook her head. I couldn't stay. Their actions reflect on their character, not yours, Luke said firmly. That's a kind perspective. Not kind, just true. His hand moved as if to reach for hers, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think Boston's loss is Montezuma's gain. And the twins, and yours. The words slipped out before Penelope could stop them. Luke's expression softened. Especially mine. They stood for a moment in companionable silence, watching the boys chase a chicken around the yard. Something was growing between them, something tentative but promising, like the first green shoots of spring. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant pattern. Penelope taught during the week, gradually winning over even the most reluctant students. The Tucker twins became her most enthusiastic pupils, particularly during history and reading lessons. Each Sunday, Luke would bring the wagon to take her to the ranch for dinner, sometimes accompanied by an afternoon ride to see the beauty of the surrounding countryside. Late October brought the first snow, just a dusting that melted by midday, but a reminder that winter approached. Luke began making preparations to move his cattle to lower pastures, which meant longer days and less time for social calls. I may not be able to come for you next Sunday, he told Penelope as he drove her back to town one evening. Fall roundup starts tomorrow, and I'll be in the saddle from dawn till dusk all week. I understand, she replied, trying to hide her disappointment. The ranch must come first. The boys will still attend school. Mrs. Finnegan will make sure they're on time. Luke hesitated. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks, I was hoping. That is, we would be honored if you would join us for the holiday. I'd like that very much, Penelope smiled. Good. Luke looked relieved. It's been a long time since we've had a proper celebration. Mrs. Finnegan makes an excellent turkey. That evening, as Penelope sat by her bedroom window watching the stars appear over Montezuma's modest skyline, she contemplated how thoroughly her life had changed in just 2 months. The pain of Thomas's betrayal, once so sharp it took her breath away, had faded to a dull ache, overshadowed by new friendships and purpose. The twins had secured a place in her heart with their mischievous grins and eager minds. And Luke Tucker was unlike any man she had ever known. Where Thomas had been polished and glib, Luke was straightforward and sometimes awkwardly honest. Where Boston society valued clever conversation and social connections, Luke valued integrity and hard work. His grief for Agnes still shadowed him, but increasingly, Penelope caught glimpses of the man beneath intelligent, kind, and possessing a quiet strength that drew her like a compass needle to true north. The following week brought heavy snowfall, turning Montezuma into a wonderland of white-capped buildings and glittering streets. Attendance at school dwindled as outlying farms and ranches became temporarily inaccessible. To Penelope's surprise, the Tucker twins appeared each morning, bundled in heavy coats and accompanied by Hank, the ranch foreman who delivered them on horseback. Mr. Tucker insisted they not miss their lessons, Hank explained gruffly. Says education's too important no matter the weather. By Thursday, only 10 students made it to school, and Reverend Miller suggested closing until the roads cleared. Penelope reluctantly agreed, sending her remaining pupils home with books and assignments to complete. That evening, as she sat in Mrs. Whittaker's parlor mending a tear in her skirt, an unexpected commotion outside drew her to the window. A horse and rider were approaching through the swirling snow, a tall figure she recognized immediately. "Luke," she gasped, hurrying to open the front door. He dismounted stiffly, his face reddened from the cold despite the scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. Snow crusted his hat and shoulders. "Penelope," he said, his voice rough from the biting wind. "I needed to see you, Mrs." Whitaker appeared in the hallway behind her, expression scandalized. "Mr. Tucker, what on earth brings you out in such weather?" "My apologies for the intrusion, Mrs. Whitaker," Luke said formally. "I have urgent business with Miss Reynolds. May I come in for a few moments?" The boarding house owner hesitated, propriety warring with curiosity. "5 minutes in the parlor with the door open," she finally decreed. "Thank you, madam." Luke removed his hat and followed Penelope into the front parlor, leaving a trail of melting snow behind him. "Is everything all right?" "Are the boys?" Penelope began as soon as they were relatively private. "The boys are fine," Luke assured her quickly. "Driving Mrs. Finnegan to distraction, being cooped up in the house, but healthy and safe." "Then why?" She gestured to the window where snow continued to fall heavily. Luke took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said about the ranch coming first. You were right, but not in the way you meant. The ranch, the cattle, the land, their means to an end. I built all this for a family, for a legacy to pass on. Without that, it's just work." Penelope's heart quickened. "Luke, what are you saying?" "I'm not saying it well." He ran a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "I rode 5 miles in a blizzard because I couldn't wait another day to tell you that you've brought something back to our lives that I thought was gone forever. The boys are thriving with you in their world, and he stepped closer, voice dropping. "I find myself thinking about you constantly, your smile, your voice, the way you look at the world with such hope." "Luke," Penelope whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know it's too soon. I know you came here to escape, not to find this," he gestured between them. "But I had to tell you how I feel, even if you're not ready to hear it." 3 minutes left, Mr. Tucker, Mrs. Whitaker called from the hallway. Luke smiled ruefully. "Not exactly the romantic declaration I'd planned." "I don't need romantic declarations," Penelope said softly. "Just honesty." "Then honestly, Penelope Reynolds, I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because I never thought I'd feel this way again after Agnes." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too, Luke Tucker, and it terrifies me because I never thought I'd trust my heart to anyone after Thomas." His eyes, so blue and earnest, searched hers. "So where does that leave us? 2 terrified people in a snowstorm." "2 brave people," she corrected gently, "willing to try again despite the risk." "Time's up," Mrs. Whitaker announced, appearing in the doorway. Luke reluctantly stepped back. "I should go before the trail becomes impassable." "You shouldn't have come at all in this weather," Penelope admonished, though her heart sang at the reason for his journey. "Worth every freezing mile," he replied with a smile that warmed her to her toes. "May I call on you properly when the weather clears, with Mrs. Whitaker's permission, of course," he added, nodding respectfully to the boarding house owner. "I suppose that would be acceptable," Mrs. Whitaker sniffed, though her expression had softened considerably. "Provided your intentions are honorable, Mr. Tucker." "Completely honorable, madam," he assured her, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. The blizzard lasted 3 days, dropping nearly 2 feet of snow on Montezuma and the surrounding countryside. School remained closed, and Penelope occupied herself with lesson plans and helping Mrs. Whitaker with household tasks. Each night she fell asleep thinking of Luke's words, his wind-chapped face and the promise in his eyes. On the 4th day, the sun emerged brilliantly, turning the landscape into a dazzling expanse of white. By noon, men were clearing paths through town, and stagecoach service resumed on a limited basis. Penelope was helping Mrs. Whitaker prepare dinner when a knock came at the front door. "It's that Tucker man again," Mrs. Whitaker reported after answering. "Says he's come to take you for a sleigh ride if you're agreeable. Brought the twins with him this time, so it seems proper enough." Penelope's heart leapt. "May I go?" The older woman sighed dramatically. "I suppose, but be back before dark and mind you stay warm." Outside, Luke waited with a small sleigh hitched to 2 matching bay horses. The twins waved excitedly from the back seat, bundled in woolen blankets. "Miss Reynolds," they shouted. "Pa brought the sleigh. We almost never use the sleigh." "It was my wife's favorite winter activity," Luke explained quietly as he helped Penelope into the front seat beside him. Hasn't been used since. Well, it seemed like a good day to bring it out again. The sleigh ride through the snow-covered valley was magical. The twins pelted each other with snowballs at every stop, while Luke pointed out landmarks normally hidden by foliage, a waterfall now frozen into fantastic ice sculptures, a granite outcropping that local legends claimed was sacred to the native tribes, the distant peaks of the Continental Divide gleaming in the winter sun. It's breathtaking, Penelope marveled as they paused atop a small rise overlooking the valley. Yes, Luke agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the view. The boys and I have been talking these last few snowed-in days about changes, about the future. What kind of changes? She asked, suddenly nervous. Good ones, I hope. Luke reached for her gloved hand. The boys miss their mother. I won't pretend otherwise, but they've come to care for you deeply, as have I. We've been half alive these past 2 years just existing. You've reminded us what a home should feel like. Before Penelope could respond, a snowball whizzed between them, followed by peals of laughter from the twins. Boys, Luke growled, though his eyes twinkled. Proper gentlemen don't interrupt important conversations with snowballs. What important conversation? Matthew asked innocently. Are you asking Miss Reynolds to marry you? Mark added with alarming directness. Luke's face reddened, and not from the cold. I was working up to that part gradually. Pa's been practicing his speech for days, Matthew confided. He made us listen like 20 times. Is that so? Penelope bit her lip to keep from smiling too broadly. They're exaggerating, Luke insisted, looking mortified. It was twice at most, and was he planning to ask me today? Yes, the twins chorused. Luke sighed in defeat. This is not how I imagined this moment. Penelope squeezed his hand. I think it's perfect, actually. A family decision. Hope sparked in Luke's eyes. Does that mean? It means I'd like to hear that speech you've been practicing, she replied softly. Luke took a deep breath, glancing at the twins who were watching with undisguised interest. Penelope Reynolds, you came into our lives when we needed you most, though we didn't know it. You've brought light and learning and laughter back to our home. The boys adore you, and his voice caught, I love you. I know we haven't known each other long, but some things you just know in your heart. I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife, a mother to my sons and the heart of our home. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming joy. I love you too, Luke. And you boys, she added, looking at the twins who had crept closer. Nothing would make me happier than to be part of your family. The twins whooped with delight, launching themselves into the sleigh and nearly toppling it in their enthusiasm. Luke steadied the vehicle with one hand while pulling Penelope close with the other. Is that a yes? He asked, his face inches from hers. That's a definite yes, she confirmed. His kiss was gentle but firm, a promise of the life they would build together. When they separated, both slightly breathless, the twins were making exaggerated gagging noises. You'll get used to it, Luke told them, grinning, because I plan to kiss your new mother quite often. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. News of the engagement spread quickly through Montezuma, with reactions ranging from hearty congratulations to veiled envy. Mrs. Whittaker was beside herself with pride at having hosted the romance under her very roof, while Mayor Holbrook worried about finding a replacement teacher. We could postpone the wedding until summer, Penelope suggested one evening as she and Luke discussed arrangements. That would give the town time to find someone new for the school. I'm not waiting 6 months to make you my wife, Luke replied firmly. Besides, the school board chairman suggested you might continue teaching until a replacement is found. Our ranch is close enough that the commute wouldn't be difficult. Thanksgiving arrived with clear skies and milder temperatures. Penelope spent the morning helping Mrs. Finnegan prepare an enormous feast, while Luke and the twins brought in additional firewood and set the table with the best china. As they gathered around the table, Luke at the head, Penelope to his right, the twins across from her, and Mrs. Finnegan and Hank completing the party, Penelope felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths years earlier. Luke cleared his throat before the meal. I think we have more to be thankful for this year than most. God has blessed us beyond measure by bringing Penelope into our lives. Though Agnes is gone, I believe she would be pleased to know her boys will have a mother's love again. And a father's strength, Penelope added softly. I'm thankful for second chances and new beginnings. The twins, for once solemn, nodded in agreement. We're thankful Miss Reynolds likes to read stories, Matthew said. And that she's going to be our new ma, Mark added. Mrs. Finnegan dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. It's about time this house had a woman's touch again. And if you don't mind my saying so, Mr. Tucker, it's about time you had some happiness. Here, here, Hank agreed gruffly, raising his water glass. After dinner, while Mrs. Finnegan and Hank cleared the dishes, Luke suggested Penelope read to the boys in the parlor. I have a few things to attend to in the barn, he explained. Won't be long. Penelope settled on the sofa with a twin on either side and opened one of their favorite books, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which she had been reading to them a chapter at a time. The boys, full from dinner, nestled against her as she began to read, their small bodies warm and trusting against her sides. She was nearing the end of the chapter when she felt a presence and looked up to find Luke standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such tender longing that it caught her breath. He hadn't announced himself, seemingly content to observe the domestic scene in silence. Pa. Matthew noticed him first. Miss Reynolds is at the good part where Tom and Becky are lost in the cave. I can see that, Luke replied, his eyes still on Penelope. Don't let me interrupt. But something in his expression made Penelope pause. What is it? She asked. Luke shook his head slightly as if unable to articulate his thoughts. Finally, he said simply, Home sounds like that. Like what? Mark asked, confused. Like your voices together, like stories and laughter. Luke entered the room fully now. For too long, this house has just been a place to sleep and eat. It hasn't been a home. And now it is, Matthew asked. Now it's beginning to be, Luke confirmed, sitting beside Penelope. Because of Miss Reynolds. Soon to be Mrs. Tucker, Mark corrected importantly, indeed. Luke smiled, taking Penelope's free hand in his. Very soon, if I have anything to say about it. 2 weeks later, on a crisp December morning, Penelope stood in the bedroom that would soon be hers at the Tucker Ranch, adjusting the simple white dress she had ordered from Denver. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown, there hadn't been time for that, but the ivory silk with delicate lace trim was the finest thing she'd ever owned. Mrs. Finnegan fussed around her, adding the final touches. Something borrowed, she said, pinning a pearl brooch to Penelope's bodice. This was my mother's. It's beautiful, Penelope whispered, touching the pearls gently. Thank you. Something blue, Mrs. Finnegan continued, producing a blue silk ribbon, for your hair. As the older woman wove the ribbon into Penelope's upswept curls, a knock came at the door. Miss Reynolds, Matthew's voice called, are you ready yet? Pa's pacing so much he's going to wear a hole in the floor. Almost ready, Penelope called back, unable to suppress a smile. Well, hurry up. Reverend Miller says he's getting hungry and Mrs. Whitaker keeps asking when we're going to start serving the cake. The small ceremony was held in the Tucker Ranch parlor, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the Christmas season. Only their closest friends attended Mrs. Whitaker, Mayor Holbrook and his wife, Reverend Miller, and several of the ranch hands. Luke waited by the fireplace, looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit. The twins stood beside him as his groomsmen, unusually subdued in matching jackets, their hair slicked down with water. As Penelope entered on Hank's arm, the foreman having nervously agreed to give her away, Luke's face transformed with a smile of such joy that tears pricked at her eyes. This was right, she knew with certainty. This man, these boys, this home, they were her future. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, Luke's kiss was tender but held a promise that made Penelope blush. The twins cheered loudly, and the small gathering broke into applause. Later, after the guests had departed and the twins had finally been persuaded to go to bed, Luke led Penelope to the porch. The night was clear, stars blazing in the black velvet sky above the silent, snow-covered valley. Happy, Mrs. Tucker? He asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace, though I still have much to learn about being a rancher's wife. You're a natural, Luke insisted. The boys adore you, Mrs. Finnegan respects you, and even Hank says you have good horse sense, which is his highest compliment. And you. Penelope turned to face him. What do you think of your new wife? Luke's eyes darkened as he drew her closer. I think she's the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. I think I'm the luckiest man in Colorado. And I think," he brushed his lips against hers, "that it's time I showed her exactly how much I love her." Their kiss deepened, and Penelope felt herself melting against him, all thoughts of the cold December night forgotten in the warmth of her husband's embrace. Later that night, as they lay together in the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Luke stroked Penelope's hair softly. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured. "After Agnes died, I was sure that part of my life was over. I focused on the boys, on the ranch, on just getting through each day." "I understand," Penelope replied, tracing the line of his jaw. "After Thomas's betrayal, I convinced myself I was better off alone, that love wasn't worth the risk. And now," his blue eyes searched hers in the dim light, "now I know that the right love is worth any risk." She smiled. "The day you rode through that blizzard to tell me how you felt, that was the moment I knew for certain. I nearly froze certain parts of my anatomy," Luke chuckled. "I'm very glad you didn't," Penelope replied with a blush, making him laugh again. "The boys want siblings, you know," he said after a comfortable silence. "They've been quite specific about wanting a sister and another brother in that order." "Have they now?" Penelope raised an eyebrow. "And what does their father want?" Luke's expression grew serious. "A lifetime of mornings waking up beside you, watching our family grow, growing old together on this land." His hand moved to rest on her stomach. "And yes, perhaps a daughter with your eyes and spirit. I think those are wonderful wishes," Penelope whispered, covering his hand with hers. "All of them?" Spring came early to Montezuma Valley that year. By late March, the snow had melted from the lower pastures, and the first wildflowers were appearing in sheltered spots. The town had finally found a replacement teacher, a spinster from Kansas City, who arrived with 3 trunks of books and a formidable reputation for discipline. Penelope had adjusted quickly to life as Mrs. Tucker. She managed the household with efficiency, assisted Mrs. Finnegan with the cooking, learned to ride astride like a proper rancher's wife, and still found time to oversee the twins' education in the evenings. The boys thrived under her guidance, their natural intelligence sharpened by her teaching methods, their wild energy channeled into productive activities. Luke watched his wife blossom in her new role with pride and growing love. The hard edges of grief that had defined him for 2 years softened in Penelope's presence. He laughed more, slept better, and found joy in simple domestic moments that had once been painful reminders of what he'd lost. On a particularly beautiful April evening, Luke returned from checking the spring calves to find the house unusually quiet. Following the sound of Penelope's voice, he discovered his family in the parlor. The twins were seated on the floor at Penelope's feet as she read to them from a book of Greek myths. Luke paused in the doorway, unwilling to interrupt. Penelope's voice rose and fell dramatically as she described Odysseus's encounter with the Cyclops, her hands gesturing to emphasize key moments. The twins were utterly captivated, their faces alight with imagination. As she read, Luke felt a now familiar warmth spread through his chest. This was what he had missed without fully understanding its absence, the sound of stories being shared, of young minds expanding, of a family bound by love and learning. Penelope glanced up, catching his eye. She smiled without pausing in her reading, a private look just for him that conveyed everything they shared. Luke smiled back, content to watch from the doorway as the woman he loved transformed his house back into a home, one story at a time. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Luke and Penelope sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. "I have something to tell you," Penelope said softly, her head resting against his shoulder. Luke was half dozing, lulled by the gentle motion of the swing and the peaceful end to a productive day. "The boys might get their wish sooner than we expected." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I saw Dr. Bennett yesterday when I was in town. He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Luke froze, then turned to look at her with widening eyes. "Penelope, are you saying?" "Yes." Her smile was radiant in the fading light. "We're going to have a baby probably around November." "A baby," Luke repeated, wonder filling his voice. He pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Our baby." "The beginning of our family," Penelope agreed, returning his embrace. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Luke kissed her tenderly. Overjoyed, grateful, terrified, proud, all of those together. The twins will be excellent big brothers, Penelope said confidently. They're already so responsible with the new foals and calves. And you'll be an amazing mother, Luke added. You already are to the boys. They sat in contented silence for a while, contemplating the future unfolding before them. You know, Luke said eventually, when I first saw you reading to the boys that day the first time you came to the ranch, I had this thought that seemed too hopeful to speak aloud. What thought? Penelope asked. I stood in the doorway watching you with the twins, hearing your voice bring those stories to life, seeing how they responded to you, and I thought, home sounds like that. Luke's voice grew husky with emotion. After 2 years of emptiness, suddenly I could imagine our home being full again with stories, with laughter, with love. Penelope's eyes filled with tears. And now it is. Now it is, Luke agreed, placing his hand once more on her still flat stomach, and it will only get fuller. I love you, Luke Tucker, Penelope whispered. And I love you, Penelope Tucker, he replied, kissing her under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the home they had built together, a home filled with second chances, new beginnings and stories yet to be told. In the years that followed, the Tucker Ranch prospered along with its growing family. The twins, under Penelope's guidance, developed into fine young men with their father's strength and their stepmother's love of learning. The daughter Luke had wished for arrived that November, a dark-haired girl they named Elizabeth, after Penelope's mother. 2 years later, a second son joined the family, completing the twins' specific request. On warm summer evenings, neighbors passing by the Tucker Ranch might hear Penelope's voice carrying on the breeze as she read to her children on the porch. And sometimes, if they looked closely, they might see Luke Tucker standing in the doorway, watching his family with a smile that spoke volumes about a man who had found his home again, a home that sounded exactly like love.